How do we win with our boss or supervisor? No matter where we're serving, we all have someone who is tasked with supervising us and helping us lead better and achieve our goals. So, on this episode of Student Ministry Connection, we're discussing what mistakes to avoid, how to build trust, and how to lead up when we need to. Let's get ready to connect and grow. Welcome to Student Ministry Connection. My name is Steve Cullum, and in my over 25 years of serving in student ministry, I've had lots of supervisors. When I was a volunteer youth leader, I had the youth pastor who I reported to. When I was a youth pastor at a small rural church, my boss was the senior pastor, the only other pastor on staff. And at one church, I had 4 different supervisors within a 5-year period because of all the different staffing changes that happened at this church. And I currently have a supervisor in my role with National Network of Youth Ministries. But one thing was common in all of these different ministry settings. I always had someone who was supposed to oversee my work, or as many call them, a boss. Now, some of those bosses were great, and others were less than great. But there was always someone. And I know from my research on youth pastor longevity and turnover intention that our relationship with our boss is a key factor in whether we will thrive in ministry. And while I strongly believe that these people should be pouring into us and supporting us, I also know that that doesn't always happen. So today I wanted to share a conversation that I had recently with Brent Squires about how to win with our bosses. Brent is a 30-year veteran in student and family ministry and the founder of Next Gen Leader Coaching. And I'm really excited for you to hear from him on this episode. Well, hey, Brent, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So I start off usually with every guest talking about testimony, get to know you a little more, what God's done in your life, how you got started in ministry and things like that.
Yeah, I'll be brief. Just kind of high end story is I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. So I lived most of my life in that general region. Was not a part of a Christian home, came to faith at the age of 5 through a family tragedy, an illness with my older brother. My whole family came to Christ pretty much around the same time as a result of that. And then that led to about, 10 years later, my father went into full-time ministry. So was raised in a Christian home, PK since I was young, and I went to Liberty University in Virginia, where I furthered my faith there, and then graduated from Liberty and realized that a good bit of that time, if I would have died at any point, I would have gone to heaven, I believe, because I had genuinely asked Christ into my heart and had largely followed him. But I don't know that I ever had ownership of my faith until really I was in my mid-20s, where one day I just had this idea that largely everything that I had believed and been doing was based on what my parents had taught me and kind of my upbringing. And I kind of had a come to Jesus moment, recommitted my life to Christ. And then it was shortly after that, within a year, I felt like the Lord called me into ministry. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I kind of entered into first it was bivocational, then it was part-time, then it was full-time ministry over about a 2-year period. But that was in 1996. And that was about 30 years ago. So I've been in full-time ministry for almost 30 years, largely in student ministry. So,
wow, that's so cool. And I know now you do a lot of coaching with student ministry leaders and next gen leaders. So yeah, how did that come all about, and when God laid that on your heart?
Yeah, before I had got into ministry, I worked for about 6 years in the NFL. I worked for the Washington Commanders now, but then they were the Washington Redskins. So that kind of gave me a really solid kind of business / consulting mindset and some training. And so then, fast forward to my youth pastor, this was like 2016. One day a church approached me, and their youth pastor had heard me do a presentation on strategic planning for a ministry. And they asked me to do that for their church as a whole. And so they brought me on a retreat and they paid me. And I was like, wow, stuff I've been doing for free for years. Somebody actually might pay me for this. And they paid me pretty well. and so I thought, that might be something I could do. And a few other people spoke in and affirmed that. And just the Lord just would send various people to me for different reasons under different circumstances. And it wasn't until maybe a year and a half ago that I kind of formally launched the coaching and actually took the legal steps to form an LLC and all that type of thing. Now it's
Sure.
still a side hustle, but I kind of formalized it under an LLC. So
That's awesome. Well, thanks for what you do for all the youth leaders that are out there.
yeah.
So today we're talking all about winning with our boss. And this is actually really important to me because I've been doing some research on youth pastor longevity recently in the last year. And one of the things that continues to pop up when we're doing surveys and talking with all these youth leaders is that one thing that continues to keep them in ministry longer is a good relationship with their supervisor, whether that be the lead pastor or another supervising pastor on their staff or whatever their situation is. So yeah, why do you think it's so important for you to have a good relationship with your boss, like student ministry leaders to have good relationships with their bosses?
Yeah, I mean, I applaud you for digging into that because I think it's really essential. It's probably one of the most overlooked aspects of student ministry. I know so many student ministry folks that, one of the reasons why they're not, maybe a major reason why they're not involved in ministry at all, or specifically student ministry, is because of issues that they had with their church and or boss or church leadership. So it's very overlooked. I would guess that in probably most student ministry undergrad programs, it's not even something that's addressed at any level with depth. Maybe general leadership classes, but not specifically how to work with a boss. And I think a lot of youth pastors probably think that their success is based on how well they preach or how many students show up or how fun their environment is. But in reality, it's so much more about your ability to win with your boss. And if you have good skills in doing that, I'm not saying suck up to them and, be rolled over, but just having an understanding of who they are as your boss and as the leader of the church, say they're the lead pastor, senior pastor, executive pastor, family pastor, whatever that is, your effectiveness or ability to be effective with them is going to directly tie to your longevity at that church and maybe even in ministry, period. If you're aligned with your senior pastor, that's going to open some doors and create longevity. If you're not aligned with your senior pastor or senior leadership, look for a very short tenure at that church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes so much sense, and yeah, it aligns with my experience at different ministries and different churches as well. I've had some that weren't so great, and it was a rough place. But man, when we align, it is a fun place to be, and I would put up with a lot of other things, like maybe even less pay or less than ideal, office or whatever it is, because I know I'm really appreciated and encouraged and all those things.
Yeah, 100%. I agree fully. I've had some good experiences and I've had some bad experiences. And I'm not saying that even if you align to them, everything is going to be great, but you can really create some headaches for yourself if you're unwilling or lack humility or teachability. And you go into that relationship with your leadership, not seeking alignment and their blessing. Again, not sucking up to them so you can keep your job or win favor, but just figuring it out. And I think that's not just within ministry. I mean, that's going to be any role in life. Leadership is still leadership, even if they're bad leadership. I mean, the Bible teaches that we don't get to pick and choose who our leaders are, and we don't get to decide, I'm not going to follow this leader or that leader. But specifically, if it's your senior pastor, your executive pastor, what have you, being able to align with them is you're trusting God at that point.
Sure. So with that in mind, what are some common mistakes maybe you've experienced or you've seen other youth pastors make in their relationship with their senior pastor or whoever their supervisor is?
Yeah, I would say probably three things that when I deal with the many different youth pastor or family ministry clients and so forth that I have had over the years, kind of three categories of mistakes. I think the first is that they assume that they're aligned without really getting clarity on that. In other words, they think, well, I'm a Christian, you're a Christian, we work for the same church, our goal is to win people to Jesus, I'm aligned. And that's not necessarily the case. Each church, although our ministry is generally the same, churches have a certain culture, a certain maybe different missional focus. Each pastor or each boss, if you will, has a different personality, different skill set, different temperament, things that they both are very passionate about within the church and some things that, they're not so passionate about. And that's okay. I get that. But assuming that you have clarity and that you're aligned with them doesn't necessarily mean that you do. So that's one bucket. It's just making a false assumption that you have alignment. Number two, I think, is leading ministry as if it's an independent ministry. And a lot of times, and I'm not even saying it's the youth pastor's fault, but you almost have your own church inside of a church. Like some of the churches that I've been at, like we have our own Sunday worship experience with our own band. And I would do the preaching and we take an offering and we have our own events and our own leadership and our own calendar and our own everything. And it's like a small church within a larger church. And that can sometimes, even if we're not intentionally trying to do that, we fall into a silo. And so that can often compete with what the larger church is doing. It can create what I call like a Saul complex, where a pastor that maybe doesn't have a strong self-identity or maybe has some weaknesses or some jealousies can kind of look at the student ministry and say, wow, they're like knocking it out of the park over there with all that youthful energy and all that, and things aren't going so great in other areas. And that's not a good sign. That's actually you're on a very slippery slope. You will probably not be at that church for very long if your pastor has that mindset. And so if you intentionally treat your church as if or your youth ministry as if it's independent of the larger church, you're making a huge mistake, and God's not going to honor that. If you're doing it unknowingly, it's not as bad, but it's almost just as bad. Like you have to figure out how not to appear or even attempt to be independent of the larger church. You have to be a supporting ministry that's really just focusing on a specific demographic, and that is youth. So you've got assuming alignment when you don't have it, leading with a silo or independent mindset. And then finally, it's simple, but it's a common mistake, is just avoiding conversations, like just not having the conversation to sit down with whoever the boss is and saying, I need clarity. I need to know what a healthy youth ministry looks like. I need to know what your expectations are. I need to know what realities you want to see. I need to have an honest assessment of what the ministry has been and what you want it to be. Mm-hmm. So just not being mature enough or experienced enough to say, let's have hard conversations, even if you feel like they might be risky. Mm-hmm. Getting the answers to those questions is going to save you a lot of headaches down the road.
That makes so much sense. And I think from my experience, Brent, and like you can tell me otherwise, I think there's a lot of leaders within the church who, for whatever reasons, haven't really been trained in how to manage people well. And so a lot of times maybe our supervisors are maybe not leading well in those areas, not because that they don't like us or they want to isolate us or anything like that. They just don't know how to do that well. And so for us, like in student ministry, we need to lead up well and ask for that feedback and things like that. So yeah, how can a youth pastor better understand what their boss actually expects of them, especially if it's not clear to start with? How do you start those conversations if they're not happening?
Yeah, and I appreciate what you said. I think like reading the book Leading from a Second Chair is like a great start, because most pastors in general go into ministry because they feel a calling from the Lord. They're usually good at preaching or, the pastoral congregational care elements of the role and different things like that, not necessarily because they have a strong managerial or leadership background. So I've seen many senior pastors that, they're very, very weak in that area. And so they wouldn't necessarily know to be doing some of the things that they should be doing. So the onus is kind of put on the student ministry or the youth pastor, but they're not necessarily equipped in those areas all the time either. So I think what you have to do is you have to stop guessing and you have to start asking some really specific questions. And I alluded to a few of these earlier, but what does success look like? I mean, that is a fair and honest question. And any boss, any lead pastor, any executive or family pastor that would ask, why are you asking that question? Like, they clearly are not doing things right. I think very few would ask that question. Most would say, hey, that's a great question. What does success look like to me from a student ministry perspective? Here, let me tell you kind of what I would look at. So what does success look like? Even asking what matters most right now. So say whether you come into a new church and you've just started or you've been there for a while, you probably need to ask, like, for what season that we're in, like, what matters at the moment, because it's gonna vary at different times. Some pastors might say, right now we just need momentum. Students aren't coming out. Maybe students are dropping out. Maybe there isn't a vibe of excitement or enthusiasm around student ministry right now. We just need to create momentum. And so then if you were smart, you would enact a plan to create some momentum. Another pastor might say, well, we've got a lot of momentum, but there's not a lot of depth here. Like, we're doing a lot of things, a lot of activities and a lot of events, but are we producing, spiritual disciples? And so just knowing what is important to your boss at the moment, that's going to go a long way, as opposed to pushing your own agenda and saying, well, right now we're heading into spring and then summer. And so we're really focusing on summer camp and summer missions trips and graduations. That's all great. But if your pastor is not, if those aren't the things that are keeping him up at night, other things are, you'd be foolish to neglect that. Another question is, what frustrates you about student ministry? It could be really simple things, like every time you borrow the church van, you never fill it up with gas and it's always left trashy. And I only know that because I heard other ministries do that, not because I've ever done that.
Sure.
But, like that might really frustrate, maybe not the lead pastor, because he might be far removed from that, but he's hearing it from other people in the church. Or maybe it's communications is poor, and that's frustrating him because that reflects poorly on the church. Whatever, you name it. But if there's something that is frustrating the pastor, your boss, you can ignore it and hope it'll go away. Or you can just come right out and say it. But if you come right out and ask, you're probably going to win him over, because he's going to have the mindset that you're concerned about what's frustrating him. That's going to earn you a tremendous amount of credibility with him. So those are just a couple of things. They say that clarity is kindness. It's kind for you, but it's also kind for whoever you're reporting to, just to be really clear. So those 3 simple questions: what does success look like? What's important now? And what frustrates you about student ministry? And if you can get any type of traction on those 3 questions, you're probably halfway there.
That's so good. Yeah. And like you said, it's on us as the student ministry leaders to actually be able to step out and have those conversations, even if they're not happening, which is so important.
Yeah. You'd like to think that the lead pastor, your boss, would be asking you those questions. But, depending on the size of the church, I'm at a church right now where there's, 50 people on staff. There's 25 directors, like my senior pastor couldn't possibly be always thinking about those questions in terms of student ministry. He's got so many other things and so many other people to worry about. So it's more so on me to seek out opportunities to ask those questions of him.
Brent, I'd love to kind of step back just a bit, because I know a lot of youth pastors, when they go into a new church, or maybe they're at a church and there's a lead pastor or an executive pastor or whatever, change. And so you have an early opportunity to build some trust there. So what are some practical ways that the youth pastors can build trust?
Yeah. And trust is capital. Like, if you have a lot of trust and you have a lot of capital, which you can cash that capital in at times when you need to. So whether you're coming into a new church, whether you're new to ministry, even if you've been somewhere a long time, building trust is essential. So I think that number one, following through and doing the things that you'll say you'll do. If you don't do that, you'll never gain traction in that area, because you'll always be seen as someone that says one thing but does something else. When you say, hey, I will make sure that email goes out, or I will make sure that gets picked up, or I will make sure that event gets on the calendar, and then you don't do that, your boss can no longer trust you, and that trust erodes, and you're probably just going to be collecting a few more paychecks, and then you'll be at Walmart. So do what you say you're going to do. I think communicate proactively, whether it's good or bad. We just had a situation at an event 2 weekends ago that, it wasn't a major situation, but it was something that I thought my boss probably needs to know about this and hear it from me before he hears about it from this parent that's going to be upset. So communicate proactively, whether it's good or bad, just kind of letting that flow up to your boss so that they're not caught off guard. A boss that's caught off guard, that's not a good thing for you. So I would say communicate proactively, and then avoiding surprises. It kind of goes along with that, but just, giving your boss ample runway, ample time to know what is happening, either so that they can step in and say, hey, tap the brakes. That's not the direction we want to go. But again, they don't want to be, they don't want to be caught off guard hearing something or seeing an email go out talking about a new major initiative that he didn't know anything about, or, whatever. There's no reason for them to be caught by surprise on anything. So avoiding surprises. And then I think just understanding the pressures that your boss is under, depending on what their role is or the size of church, or it's really regardless of those, he or she's going to be under pressure. And having an understanding of how they communicate, how they respond to certain pressures and what those pressures are, then you kind of know, when to take a step forward, when to press pause, when to take a step back. But that's going to build trust as well. If you're just always showing up at the wrong time, like dropping stuff at the last minute, not being proactive and dropping a landmine in your boss's, that's not going to win you any credibility.
Yeah. Yeah. I love what you said about, being proactive as well. Yeah. You never want your supervisor to walk in and see the hole in the wall before you had a chance to tell him. Yeah. It's never a good thing.
Nope. Never done that either.
So one of the things that I've had some experience in as well is that alignment issue. I hope that every lead pastor, senior pastor, executive pastor has their own vision for their church and where they want it to go and in their community and all that sort of thing. But, a lot of student ministry leaders also have strong vision for their ministry. So how can we make sure we're aligned and our ministry is supporting the overall ministry of the church? I think especially even in times where maybe it's not as clear what that vision is, because I come from a background where I just feel like that alignment is very important, but how do we make sure that actually is happening?
Yeah, that's good. This is where there's typically a big breakdown in student ministry and student youth pastors. We tend to think that it's our job to build a strong student ministry. And that's not fully true. Our job is not to build a ministry. It's really to advance the church's mission. And student ministry is, typically in a good, healthy church is a significant part of that church mission. But again, we get siloed a lot of times, and we kind of take some, idea that we got to build a ministry and it has to grow and flourish. And we just run full speed ahead with that. Sometimes so fast and furious that we kind of leave the church mission and vision out of our equation. And so I think we have to realize that we're building the church's mission. We're a part of that. And I use the saying that alignment always beats autonomy. And so just make sure that you have a clear understanding of what your church vision is. Now, therein lies a problem, because a lot of churches, unfortunately, don't have or haven't communicated clearly a strong vision. They don't have a strategic plan. They know their general calling is to, make disciples and preach the gospel and things like that. But they don't know how to maybe live that out in a strategic and tactical way. But if your church isn't one of those churches to have all of that laid out very clearly, it's still your job to do the best that you can to try to understand what the vision and the mission of your specific church is, and then come alongside of it. My church just this past year adopted a discipleship rhythm for everyone in the church so we could have a better idea how we were making disciples and the progress we were making there. And so seeing that as something new, I had to make a pivot, and I had to change some of the things that I was doing to get in alignment with that discipleship rhythm. So now there's 5 pieces to that rhythm. So now we're in a student ministry are trying to implement all 5 of those same 5 things that the larger church is doing, because we want to be in alignment. We don't want to have our own competing, measures and processes and things like that. So that's really, really important, is to try to figure out what is your church's mission, vision, strategy, and make sure, maybe not in every single detail, not everything will apply, but at least in a broad general perspective, you are aligned with that vision. That also will win you a ton of credibility with your leadership. If they see you're not trying to build your own kingdom, you're trying to support the larger church, that'll win you so much credibility.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, I was at one church one time, and I was waiting for a new lead pastor to lead out with vision, and he wasn't doing that much at all. And I actually talked to my direct supervisor, because it was a larger church, and I was a little frustrated by that. It's like, I want to be aligned. What do I do? He's not really talking about his vision. And he encouraged me to pay attention to what he was saying and what he was doing, because he's able to communicate his vision through different things. He's not kind of being your really black and white and lying it out and saying, hey, here is my vision for this church and this ministry. But what is he talking about on a regular basis? What is he doing on a regular basis? Because that really is his vision. He's just not fleshing it out very clearly, but he is saying it, and through those things.
It can be frustrating because, like I said, not every church, that is their strength, having a vision and strategic plan. I was at a church a number of years back, and, strategic planning is like, I have a master's degree in organizational leadership, and like, I'm really big into that. And so I laid out my plan and I wrote it all out, and I asked my pastor to sit down and to view it. And it was all great. I mean, I'll pat myself on the back. It was very well done. And we ended up executing it, but I could tell he was a little bit nervous. And he said, man, you're even way farther than our church is. He was like, will you press pause on your vision until the church can catch up to you? Mm. And I wanted to say no, because I'd put so much work into it and was so excited to start some of the initiatives. And I had to say, yes, I'll press pause on it. And that kind of motivated him to like kind of get some. And the great thing for me is he actually brought me in on that process. So I got to then use the skills to help the church shape its vision. And then once they were kind of ready to go, then we all moved forward, but we were in unison and we were aligned. So
that's really good. Yeah. And again, I think it really comes down to what you're saying is being proactive and taking that initiative, even like I said, from the books, like from the second chair, or, when we're not those leaders, to be able to lead up well. So there are those times, I think, as well, maybe when your vision is not necessarily aligned, or maybe there's just situations where you're disagreeing with your lead pastor or your supervisor. What's the best way to handle those situations? Because I'm 100% of the time, you're not going to align across the board. So when those disagreements do happen, what's the youth pastor supposed to do?
Post about it on social media.
Blast them as much as you can.
Exactly. No, don't do that. I would say it's kind of counterintuitive. It's all the things that you would necessarily not think of, or at least I wouldn't think of. But when you hear the list, it'll make sense. There's only, say, 3. I would say, first of all, go directly to them and just set up a time, and don't go in blasting them and like, hey, this is wrong. This is unbiblical. Like, I would just go in and just ask again, clarity is kindness. Just, go in and say, hey, I'm not understanding this. Like, can you help unpack this a little bit more? But the key is those 2 words: go directly to them. Don't go sideways. Don't go down to the people under you or to volunteers or, whatever. Don't preach a stern sermon about it. Just go to your boss, your pastor, and just say, I need clarity here. And then just trust God that you'll get it. Ask a lot of questions at that meeting or series of meetings, just clarifying questions. Don't go in defensive or trying to blast somebody, but just ask good questions so that and then do a lot of listening, and then seek understanding. Like if it still doesn't make sense or still doesn't add up, or it seems like it's not aligned with itself, just continue to seek understanding until you get it. And then you have to decide. I mean, most of these things are very resolvable, but if it's something really big, like you just cannot get on board with, then you might have to ask yourself some questions like, is this the place I can be, or is this the place I can be long term? But that's usually pretty rare. Most of the time you get exactly what you need, and even if you still disagree with it, usually it's something that you can at least get behind. You don't have to agree with everything to move forward. So
yeah. I was actually just talking to a youth pastor that I was coaching just this week, and something came up, and it wasn't necessarily something they disagree on, but they were kind of caught in between, where someone else from the church said, hey, this is what the lead pastor has been doing is kind of bothering me, but they felt comfortable coming to the youth pastor to talk to him, which was great because they built a strong relationship, but he kind of feels caught in between. So I was encouraging him basically to do the same thing that you said, is go have that person, and also maybe even go with them, but to ask questions first, and rather than going in and being accusatory, just go in and seek answers first, because that clarity is going to be so important.
Yeah, well, sometimes somebody will come sideways and say, "Hey, or another staff person, you'll step out of a big staff meeting and vision wasn't clear, or maybe it goes against something that you've thought of, and somebody will say, "Hey, I didn't really agree with that. What do you think?" You got to be really careful you don't get pulled into a sideway
Mm,
conversation that undermines your boss. But then that's typically when I think of the question, like, have you talked to him about it, or have you talked to her about it? And if
mm,
they say no, your best bet is to, like, you know, hit those brakes pretty quickly. I
yeah.
mean, that's actually not biblical. Like, you need to go to that person first and deal with it there so that it doesn't turn into something else going sideways. So,
Mm, yeah, that's so true. So yeah, I know we talked about this quite a bit. I think a lot of our conversation so far really does. I'm hearing a lot of leading up and well and taking that
mhm.
initiative. Any other tips that you've kind of come across, whether your own experience or talking with other youth pastors on some ways that we can lead up well as a youth pastor?
Yeah, I mean, I think leading up is really essential. It really just means, a lot of times people say, "What does that mean? I don't have the
Sure.
authority to lead up." But it's not about authority. What you're really doing is you're just helping your leader, your boss succeed. Like right now, my boss is significantly younger than I am. And, I will have to sometimes say, okay, it doesn't matter about my age or my experience or lack of experience. It's not about that. It's how do I help them lead to the best of their ability? And sometimes that is doing things like anticipating needs. Like, what are they looking for? What needs do they have? And so you can lead up by identifying those needs and even trying to meet them by bringing solutions to the table. I have a staff of 6, and I tell my staff, when you come to me with an issue, and you will, it would be really great if you also bring a solution. If you're going to come with a problem, don't just come in and say, "Hey, we have a problem because this and this, we got 2 conflicting events on the calendar," like, or whatever. Like, okay, well, what's the solution? Like, if you're just seen as a problem bringer
Mm,
without bringing solutions, like we'll tend to tense up when we see those people coming. They're just always coming to bring us a problem. But how delightful is it when somebody comes and they say, "Hey, there's a problem, but we have 2 different options that we could look at." Like, now you see, like, hey, we're all on the same team here. We're trying to solve problems. So don't just go in and drop, problems on the desk of your boss. Come in and bring some solutions to the same problems. That also helps you out because it shows that you're thinking and you're a problem solver, and you can influence without having the authority. So you can go in and say, "Hey, here's what I've experienced before, or I've seen it done this way, or man, here's a possible solution to this issue." You're going to make the ultimate decision, but man, that helps your boss out because now he sees you as somebody
mm,
that's an advocate, somebody that's on his team, not somebody that just shows up and says, "Here's a problem. You get
mm,
paid to deal with that. Deal with it." So that's how you lead up. Those are just a couple of
mm,
ways that you can lead up without having any title or, given authority.
mm,
That's also how you get promoted. I mean,
mm.
I mean,
Sure.
people see that, and they see you're a solution bringer. You influence without needing authority or titles. You are somebody that's thinking of need. You're seeing the needs, and it's like in soccer, they say, like, don't pass the ball to where the person is, pass the ball to where they're going to be. Like, if you can have that mindset in ministry, like, you're gonna be promoted. Maybe not out of student ministry because there's nothing higher in the church than student ministry,
Amen.
but
Amen.
you'll be given more responsibility, more opportunities, more leadership because you're seen as somebody that's a team player by leading up.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And that totally makes sense. And I think there's a lot of youth pastors that I think we do. It's easy to kind of get put in our little corner or whatever and think, oh man, I'm not given much responsibility. I'm not this and that.
Yeah,
But how much are we actually taking what we have and taking an initiative and leading well where we currently are?
sure.
That is going to, simply put, it's going to earn that trust and earn that responsibility. And like even Jesus says, you're trusted with a little, you're going to be given a little, and then you're going to be given a lot based on that.
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
that's so important. And I
yeah. No,
think
that's true.
I think through that, a lot of what you alluded to as well is we're helping make our boss's job easier in the long run.
Mhm.
That's one of the
Yes.
big ways to add, to earn trust and all those things. What are some other ways that we can make our boss's job easier? Not that we're going to take over and be the lead pastor, that sort of thing. Like, just let me preach all the time, that sort of thing. But what are some ways that we can make their job easier so that when they see us, they don't run? They're actually, man, I'm so glad you're here.
Yeah, and I think of like a boss, and a boss typically has a staff, whether that staff is one person or 100 people. But a staff, you think about the practical uses of a staff. Staff is something that you lean on. You think of Moses with his staff, and it was a tool that he used to minister. And so a boss has a staff, and as a person on his or her staff, you want to be somebody that they can lean on. One of the things that you can do is you can try to figure out what pressures are they carrying. They obviously have you and probably other people who report to them. So what pressures are they carrying? They're getting all these things thrown at them, on a daily basis. Have you been able to identify different things that they're going through, that they're experiencing, different weights, burdens that they're bearing? And then can you solve any of those problems before they reach them? There's going to be some things that, there's nothing that you can do about every single burden that they're carrying, but are there things that you can take care of before they reach your boss? That way you are seen again as someone that's eliminating issues. You're lightening the load. You're taking pressure off as opposed to adding pressure on. A lot of times we just want to go to our boss and complain. I don't have enough money in my budget. There's not enough space. We don't have this. We don't have that. But we need to not be so much viewed as a problem bringer, but as somebody that can actually relieve pressure and take things away and not escalate things up. Things should not constantly be escalating up to your boss. Mm. If they are, that's weak leadership in you.
Man, Brent, you've shared so much. And if I wasn't sitting here recording this conversation, I'd probably have a whole notebook of notes at this point. But I'm sure people listening are probably thinking, okay, this is a lot, but if we could boil it down to maybe just like one practical and simple step that youth pastors could do that are listening to this and they're thinking just this week, what is one thing that they can do to improve that relationship with their boss?
Yeah, no, that's solid. With my coaching clients that I have, one of the things I'll often tell them is go to your boss, schedule a meeting, and just say, hey, what does success look like for me over the next 6 months? And maybe 6 months is farther out than you really can stomach. So maybe it's 90 days, which is 3 months, because most of these pastors are not great at math. But just what does success look like for me over the next 90 days or 6 months? That is such a great question for your boss to be asked, because they will probably tell you success looks for you over that period of time like this. And if you can walk away with a couple bullet points, now you have an action plan, or at least you can make an action plan. If they say, hey, attendance has really been down, then you can think, okay, let's attack that. Hey, the communication has been really weak and our parents are frustrated because they don't know what's going on or whatever. Now you can figure out, how do I clean that up? Your messages have not really been on point. Now you can figure out, hey, I got to put more time and allocate more resources towards my message prep. Like if you can go in and just say, hey, I'm not trying to be the perfect youth pastor overnight, but if you were to look at my ministry and say, this is what success is going to look like, and given a defined period of time, it could be the next 6 weeks. And if you're really in a crisis, if you're somebody that you feel like you're about to be fired or you're about to throw in the towel and quit, you should probably be saying, what can I do over the next week? And get clarity even in that increment. You'll be surprised, A, how much pressure that takes off of you, and B, how much that motivates you, because it'll help you put together an action plan. And then at the end of that time period, you probably should schedule a time to go back to your pastor and say, here's what I've been working on. And not to brag about yourself, but just to show him, hey, this is what you identified, and I'm 100% bought in on trying to make that a reality. So just to summarize, one thing that you can do this week is schedule a time to sit down with your boss and say, what does success look like for me over X period of time?
That's so good.
That's why.
That's so good. Brent, I know people are going to want to connect with you more. So where can people find you online, find your coaching, and just connect with you more?
Yeah, they can find me online, like on Facebook. I'm just Brent Squires, Squires, on Instagram. I don't do much on my personal Instagram. It's actually pretty sorry, but I do have a coaching Instagram, which is Next Gen Leader Coaching, Next Gen Leader Coaching. And that's my website too, Next Gen Leader Coaching. So yeah, they can find me there.
Cool. Cool. Well, before we wrap up, I just want to give you a chance to offer any closing encouragement that you'd like to share with our podcast community.
Yeah, I would say two things. Number one, a lot of times different clients that I work with say, hey, I went into youth ministry because I love God, I love teaching his word, and I love students and pointing the next generation to Christ. I'm just not good with all the manager, leadership, and admin stuff. And I say, that's great, but that's a big excuse. Get good. That's part of your job. You're youth ministry is a profession. It's not something over here relegated to the side. It used to be many decades ago, but now it's a bona fide ministry of the church, and you need to treat it as such, even if it's not your long range, plan. While you've been giving this mantle of being in charge of a ministry, quit using the excuse of, I'm not good at leadership, I'm not good at admin, I'm not very organized, and get good. Get as good as you can be. That's the first thing I'd say. And then I'll say this, sometimes that breakthrough isn't changing churches. I talk to so many folks that they think the answer to their problem is changing churches. And really it's changing how you lead with what you're already doing. Like most of the time, like significant, you can extend your life cycle at a church by just getting better in the organization and leadership standpoint. And even if the problem isn't with you, it is with maybe the relationship or something with the church, you're going to come out on the other side better for improving your leadership. So I would say those two things. It's not always about doing more. A lot of times it's just about doing something different, just because the weight that you're carrying is different right now. And so instead of just trying to add more to your plate, just look at what you've been given and try to focus on getting better as a leader.
Brent, it's been so good to have you on and to talk about some very, very practical and important areas of ministry that, like you said, I think we don't talk about a lot. These sort of things are not often covered in Bible colleges or even conferences that I've gone to before, but it's such an important aspect of youth ministry, is that interpersonal relationship with our supervisors. So thank you so much for bringing such amazing wisdom today, but also for all that you've done in ministry over the years. And now that what you're doing as well to coach other youth pastors, just thank you for all that, and pray that God continues to bless it.
Yeah. And that's my goal. People ask me what's the purpose of the coaching? And I think a big thing that I've seen is so many youth folks leave ministry. And I think the church is struggling right now. I talked to a friend that does recruiting, and he talks about it takes 9 months on average for them to find and fill an open youth pastor role. Yeah. And I think that's probably par for the course. And so one of my goals, with the coaching in particular, is just helping folks stay longer at it, regardless of whether it's the same church or not. That's not necessarily up to me, but keep helping folks stay in the game longer, not just more days or weeks or months, but how can we have good, solid youth folks in leadership positions for a decade or more? Because like you mentioned at the very top of the interview, the longevity piece, it really does make a huge, huge difference. So if you can stay around longer because you're healthier and you're not getting fired, that's going to be good for you. It's going to be good for your church. It's going to be good for the students. It's going to be good for the kingdom.
Amen. Amen. Yeah. So
Thanks
important. Yeah. Thank you. Well, thanks again for being here for this episode. And if you were able to connect with Brent and me and grow as a leader, please take a moment to give this podcast a positive rating on your favorite podcast app, or like it on YouTube. And also share it with another leader who you think would benefit from hearing it. I also want to recommend a book that I read several years ago called How to Lead When You're Not in Charge by Clay Scroggins. It's very helpful for those of us who are in student ministry and often play that, quote, middle management type of role. If you'd like to support me in this podcast and my ministry with National Network of Youth Ministries by joining our financial or our prayer partnership team, go to nnym.org/Steve Cullum, or you can also just follow the links in the show notes. And if you're looking for a speaker for your next youth group event or leader training, check out youthmenhub.com/speakerhub for a list of experienced student ministry speakers who you can book for your next event. You'll also see me on that list. And that link is also going to be in our show notes. As we get closer to the graduation season, as this episode is releasing, I also want to remind you of a couple of past episodes that you may want to check out, especially if you missed them. Episode 121 is about helping students not graduate from their faith when they're done with high school. And on episode 128, I share a way to celebrate high school graduates that I've been doing for quite some time in 3 different churches. As always, we'll be back in a couple weeks with the next episode, so be sure to subscribe so you can get it as soon as it becomes available. And until then, be sure to stay connected, and may God bless your ministry.